There is a place on Earth where stepping foot on the shore is a crime. If you are an unauthorized human, you are forbidden from Surtsey. You won't find it on a standard tourist map, but the consequences for trespassing are severe. Violating the ban on Surtsey can lead to massive fines, jail time, and for the scientific community, a level of international shame that is nearly impossible to erase. Why such extreme measures? Well, it's because this island is off limits to almost everyone, except a handful of credentialed researchers. Since 1965, it has served as a natural laboratory for studying the colonization of plants and animals. We are going to explore an island that serves as Earth's reset button, showing us exactly how nature builds itself from nothing. Stick around to see how this isolated paradise evolved. November 14th, 1963. The water is cold, gray, and churning. About 20 miles off the southern coast of Iceland, the Atlantic Ocean begins to boil. This is not a slow rise, it is a violent, screaming eruption from the ocean floor. On the deck of the trawler Islever II, a cook is watching the horizon. He is the first person to see it, a column of dark smoke, thick and suffocating, punching through the Atlantic sky. He doesn't know it yet, but he is witnessing the official birthday of Surtsey. A landmass is being torn from the depths, born in fire and steam. The ocean is no longer just water, it is a violent collision of magma and salt. The world is simply resetting itself right in front of him. From the depths of the North Atlantic, the ocean began to tear itself apart. For 4 years, from 1963 to 1967, the eruptions that formed Surtsey were not merely geologic events, they were a war between water and magma. The violence was so extreme that pilots flying over the eruption thought they were witnessing a nuclear explosion. As the ash columns reached for the sky, the government of Iceland gave the landmass a name that mirrored the chaos. They called it Surtsey, after Surtra, the Norse fire giant destined to set the world ablaze during Ragnarok. The island grew in agonizingly slow, violent bursts, continuing until the final eruption ended on June 5, 1967. By the time the lava cooled and the steam ceased, a new piece of the world had been forged in fire. But it was a hollow, sterile shell of a land. This was not a birth, but a reconstruction of the Earth's crust in real time. The fire eventually subsided, but what remained was a void. When the first scientists stepped onto the cooling rock, they didn't find a struggle for survival. They found nothing. Surtsey was born as a completely sterile landmass with no bacteria, seeds, or life. Not a single microbe, not one microscopic spore hiding in the crevices of the basalt. It was as if the earth had pressed a reset button, scrubbing the slate clean of every biological trace. For the first time in human history, we weren't looking at an ecosystem that had evolved over millennia. We were looking at a blank page, a piece of the planet that had simply forgotten how to be alive. By 1964, the first researchers began their descent onto the ash. In 1965, They declared the entire island a nature reserve for science. This was not just a protection order. It was the creation of the Surtsey Nature Reserve, a pristine natural laboratory, protected since its birth, where the island is free from human interference. To maintain this void, the rules are absolute. Those few who enter must scrub their boots and clean their equipment to ensure no seeds or microorganisms are introduced. There is a strict ban on bringing living animals, plants, seeds, plant parts, or waste. You can't even eat on the island. A single crumb could be a biological contaminant. Access is a fortress. Only a handful of approved scientists are allowed to visit Surtsey per year, with maybe 2 to 3 research trips annually. Later, we'll see how a single grain of barley brought by a researcher accidentally nearly ruined the experiment. It is almost comical, this obsessive need for purity. But the reality is far more fragile. Early tourists who successfully landed on the island left behind bottle caps, cigarette butts, and human waste. They didn't realize they were poisoning a laboratory. The consequence was a biological glitch. Tomato plants grew from the human sewage left by early tourists on Surtsey. A garden of waste in a sterile void. Even the professionals aren't immune. A research team accidentally brought in a single grain of barley, which sprouted and had to be removed immediately. One seed, one mistake. That is all it takes to rewrite the history of an entire ecosystem. Wind and sea spray began to carry the first microscopic inhabitants to the shore. In 1965, bacteria and fungi, including various molds, finally arrived on Surtsey, claiming the sterile rock. Then came the seeds carried by ocean currents. The water acted as a sea conveyor, pushing organic matter across the Atlantic. 4 years after the eruption, a single sea rocket plant was discovered on the northern shore. It had floated across 20 miles of ocean to land here. At that time, there were only 10 species of vascular plants on the entire island. The sea rocket was the first vascular plant to take root, a fragile green sliver against the black ash. But the birds arrive later, and they change everything in a way that soil science doesn't expect. By the late 1960s, the silence of the sterile rock was broken. Gulls, fulmars, and guillemots began nesting on Surtsey, claiming the volcanic slopes. They weren't just visitors, they were architects of a new world. Their waste, the guano, became the catalyst for a biological explosion. This substance, rich in nitrogen and phosphorus, transformed the raw volcanic soil, turning a wasteland into a fertile ground. With the birds came the hitchhikers. Insects such as flies, beetles, and spiders arrived, either drifting on the wind or clinging to the feathers of the birds. The chemistry of the soil shifted, and the flora followed. By 1970, a dozen plant species had taken root. By 1986, that number grew. Today, Surtsey currently hosts over 70 plant species, a staggering leap from the absolute void of 1963. Now, the island is no longer just a rock. Seals have started hauling out on the beaches of Surtsey, their heavy bodies marking the shoreline. The process of colonization is no longer a theoretical experiment. It is a living, breathing reality. Some anomalies simply refuse to fit the data. In 2008, researchers discovered a new species of bush on Surtsey, and it shouldn't have been there. Its nearest relative was hundreds of miles away. How did a woody shrub cross that void of salt and wind? Then there are the earthworms. They were found in the soil of Surtsey, yet their method of arrival remains a mystery. They cannot fly. They cannot swim across the North Atlantic. They just appeared, carving tunnels into the volcanic ash. Surtsey is more than just a rock in the Atlantic. It is a pristine, natural laboratory. Because the island remains free from human interference, it provides unique long-term information on the primary succession and the colonization process of new land by plant and animal life. It is a window into the deep past. Surtsey serves as a model for how Iceland itself formed millions of years ago through volcanic eruptions, building land from the seafloor. But the implications stretch further. Data from Surtsey is used to understand how other planets, such as Mars or the moons of Jupiter, might hold life. Even on our own planet, Surtsey's colonization process provides insights for climate researchers studying how life will colonize new land, exposed by melting glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland. This commitment to a no-human zone has even influenced conservation policy worldwide, leading other countries to create similar zones for ecological recovery. The ocean is reclaiming what it gave. Since its birth, wave erosion has been trimming the island's size, acting like a slow, relentless grinding wheel. By 2012, the data was clear. Surtsey is shrinking. It has lost almost half of its original size, nearly 50% of its original landmass. The once expansive 1.4 square kilometers are being eaten away by the North Atlantic. This is the tragedy of the biological experiment. The very water that brought the first seeds and birds to the shore is now pulling the land back into the depths. Scientists estimate that in a few centuries, Surtsey might disappear entirely and sink back into the ocean. Surtsey was born from a violent collision of fire and salt, announced by ash columns that reached 20,000 feet into the gray Atlantic sky. From that chaos emerged a void so absolute that it required a fortress of laws and scrubbed boots to protect its purity. We watched as a single sea rocket plant claimed the black ash, and as the guano of nesting gulls turned a wasteland into a fertile sanctuary. But as we stand back and observe, the North Atlantic is slowly erasing the evidence. The island is shrinking, sliding back into the depths from which it rose. We have spent decades documenting every grain of barley and every unexpected earthworm, treating this rock as a blueprint for life itself. Yet, as the shoreline vanishes, we are left with a cold realization. We are not the architects of this world, merely witnesses to a cycle that does not need us to complete it. If you enjoyed this journey into the unknown, consider following for more stories of Earth's strangest places.